At dinner with my husband's friends, one asked how we met. He grinned and said, "She wouldn't stop texting me, persistent little thing." They laughed. He added, "She was obsessed, honestly." I felt bad saying no. More laughter. Then, "Now she runs after me like a puppy. Guess I'm her best achievement." I smiled, finished my drink, and decided he'd never humiliate me again. "Look at my wife, she's like a perfectly trained show dog," Spencer announced to his golf buddies as I delivered their drinks on the terrace, his hand gripping my waist possessively. "Knows exactly when to speak, when to smile, when to disappear. Took years of work, but I finally got her properly housebroken." The men laughed while I maintained my practiced smile, but inside something crystallized. Today would be the last time Spencer Whitfield would parade me around like his personal achievement. Before we continue, if you've ever been diminished by someone who should have lifted you up, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these stories reach others who need them. Now let's see what happens next. I set down the tray of scotch and sodas with practiced grace, making sure each glass landed on a coaster without a sound. Richard Hartford, Spencer's closest friend from the firm, raised his glass in mock appreciation. "You've got her well trained, Spence. Mine still thinks she has opinions about my portfolio decisions." Another round of laughter. I felt Spencer's fingers dig slightly into my hip, his signal that I should laugh along. So I did, the tinkling sound as hollow as crystal. "Run along now, sweetheart," Spencer said, patting my hip like rewarding an obedient pet. "The men need to talk business." I turned to leave, catching my reflection in the glass door. Blonde hair perfectly styled, designer dress that Spencer selected last week, makeup subtle enough to seem natural but precise enough to meet his standards. Everything about me was curated, managed, reduced to his specifications. In the kitchen, I steadied my breathing while loading the dishwasher. Through the window, I could see them on the terrace, Spencer gesticulating broadly, probably telling another story where I was the punchline. 7 years. 7 years I had played this role, each day eroding a little more of who I used to be before I became Mrs. Spencer Whitfield. The clock on the microwave read 2:47 p.m. In 3 hours I would need to start preparing for tonight's company dinner. Another performance where I would smile vapidly while Spencer's colleagues discussed markets I understood better than they did, strategies I could have improved if anyone thought to ask my opinion. But they never did. Why would they? I was just Spencer's pretty wife, his greatest accomplishment in training a wild thing into submission. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my hand trailing along the banister Spencer had specifically chosen because it photographed well for dinner parties. Everything in our penthouse had been selected for appearance, for the impression it would make on others. Even me. Especially me. In the walk-in closet, I pushed aside the designer dresses Spencer approved of and reached behind them to the hidden panel I had installed 2 years ago. Behind it lay a small space where I kept the remnants of my former self, my MBA diploma from Wharton, rolled carefully and tied with string, my CPA certification, the business cards from Thorne Consulting, the firm I had built from nothing and surrendered everything for love. Or what I had thought was love. A memory surfaced unbidden. 3 years ago, standing in Veronica's office, signing the papers that transferred majority ownership to her. "This is temporary," Veronica had said, her eyes worried. "You'll be back." But I had been so certain then, so convinced that Spencer needed me to be less so he could be more. "It's embarrassing having my wife compete in my world," he had said after a client chose my proposal over his. "It makes me look weak. You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" I had understood. I had understood that loving Spencer meant shrinking myself to fit the space he allocated for me. I had understood that his ego required my diminishment. I had understood everything except how much it would cost me. From downstairs, I heard the terrace door slide open and male voices filling the foyer. They were leaving. I quickly closed the hidden panel and selected the navy dress Spencer had approved for tonight. Conservative neckline, appropriate length, expensive enough to reflect his success but not so expensive as to suggest I had my own money. He didn't know about the trust fund my grandmother had left me, the one I had never touched, the one that sat gathering interest while I played the role of financially dependent wife. "Madeline." Spencer's voice echoed up the stairs. "Come say goodbye to the boys." I descended the stairs with measured steps, reapplying my vacant smile. Richard was waiting by the door, his eyes sliding over me with the casual assessment men like him felt entitled to. Beautiful as always, Madeline. Spencer's a lucky man. The luckiest, Spencer agreed, pulling me against him with proprietary force. Though between us it wasn't luck. Just good training. More laughter. Richard clapped him on the shoulder and left. When the door closed, Spencer turned to me, his expression shifting to the critical assessment I knew so well. Your laugh was a bit loud earlier. We've discussed this. Feminine, not bold. Tonight's important. Garrett Blackwell will be there with his wife, and I'm up for the partnership advancement. I need you to be perfect. Of course, I said, my voice pitched exactly where he preferred it. And remember the story, he continued, adjusting my necklace with clinical precision. You pursued me. You were persistent. I gave in out of kindness. That's the narrative they know, so that's what you reinforce. Can you handle that without making me look bad? I nodded, not trusting my voice to maintain its practiced tone. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that once felt tender but now felt like a owner's mark on property. Good girl. Start getting ready. We leave at 7 sharp. As he walked toward his study, I stood alone in our vast foyer, surrounded by the beautiful cage he had built for me. Tonight he would tell his degrading story again. Tonight his colleagues would laugh at my expense again. Tonight I would smile and play the role of his perfectly trained achievement again. Or would I? I climbed back upstairs, but this time I had a different purpose. From the hidden panel, I pulled out my old laptop, the one Spencer didn't know existed. As it powered on, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. My fingers moved across the keyboard with forgotten confidence, logging into accounts I had kept alive but dormant. Contact lists. Client databases. Financial records from Thorne Consulting. Everything was still there waiting. Just like the woman I used to be, somewhere beneath the surface of Spencer's creation. The clock showed 3:22 p.m. Less than 4 hours until dinner. 4 hours to prepare for another performance as Mrs. Spencer Whitfield, devoted wife and greatest achievement. But as I closed the laptop and began to dress, I knew something had shifted. That crystallized moment on the terrace hadn't been anger or hurt. Those emotions I had learned to bury. It was clarity. The simple, perfect understanding that I had been living as someone else's achievement long enough. Tonight would be different, though Spencer wouldn't know it yet. Tonight, while I smiled and nodded and played my part, I would be taking notes. Not the kind that helped me remember his colleagues' wives' names or their children's schools. The kind that would help me remember who I was before I became what he made me. The navy dress slipped over my shoulders like armor disguised as silk. The valet took Spencer's keys with the kind of deference reserved for regular patrons who tipped excessively, and Spencer's hand pressed against my lower back, guiding me toward the restaurant entrance. The pressure was firm, proprietary, the same way he might steer an expensive car into a parking space. Through the glass doors, I could already see the warm glow of the dining room, hear the sophisticated murmur of conversations that would soon include my degradation as entertainment. Shoulders back, Spencer murmured in my ear as we approached the hostess stand. And remember, let me lead the conversation tonight. Garrett's considering me for the Singapore project, and I can't afford any distractions. The hostess, a young woman whose name tag read Sophia, lit up when she saw Spencer. Mr. Whitfield. Your usual table is ready. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell have already arrived. Her eyes skimmed over me without acknowledgement, as if I were an expensive accessory Spencer had worn to dinner. Perhaps that's exactly what I was. The restaurant hummed with the kind of controlled energy that comes with 3-figure entrees and year-long reservation lists. Spencer navigated us through the space with practiced ease, nodding to other diners he recognized, his hand never leaving my back. I recognized several faces from his firm, from charity events, from the countless dinners where I had perfected the art of being present but not prominent. Garrett Blackwell stood as we approached, his silver hair catching the light from the chandelier above. Eleanor remained seated, her assessment of my dress beginning at my shoes and traveling slowly upward, her expression revealing everything she thought about my choice before she had even said hello. The navy dress that Spencer had approved suddenly felt like a costume that didn't quite fit the role. Spencer. Garrett's handshake was the kind men perfect in business school, firm and slightly too long. And the lovely Madeline. The way he said lovely made it clear it was a courtesy, not an observation. Eleanor, you look wonderful, I said, taking my assigned seat. She was wearing Saint Laurent, I noticed, while mentally calculating that her earrings alone cost more than Spencer knew I had in my personal account. "Thank you, dear," Eleanor replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "That's quite a classic dress." Code for boring. Safe. Unremarkable. Everything Spencer wanted me to be. "She doesn't need flash," Spencer said, already signaling the waiter for drinks. "Natural beauty and all that." He said it like he was defending a purchase, explaining why he had chosen the practical model over the luxury one. Garrett was already 3 stories into firm gossip when our drinks arrived. A martini for me, exactly how Spencer had ordered it without asking my preference. Whiskey neat for him and Garrett. White wine for Eleanor, who held her glass like a prop she had no intention of actually drinking from. "The Mitchell account is a disaster," Garrett was saying, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty successful men perfect when discussing others' failures. Though not surprising considering Tom's recent distractions. Spencer laughed, the sound calculated to show he was in on the joke without seeming too eager. I sipped my martini and let their voices wash over me, noting how Eleanor watched me with the kind of attention usually reserved for spotting counterfeit handbags. "Speaking of distractions," Garrett said, his attention suddenly shifting to me with the weight of a spotlight. "How did you two meet?" "I don't think I've ever heard the full story." My mouth opened slightly, ready to share the actual story. The conference where I had presented on market strategies, Spencer approaching me afterward with nervous energy, his business card trembling slightly in his hand. But Spencer's hand found my knee under the table, a warning squeeze that meant silence. "Oh, this is a good one," Spencer said, his grin spreading like oil across water. "She wouldn't stop texting me. Persistent little thing." He laughed and Garrett joined him immediately. "I mean, we're talking dozens of messages a day. I'd wake up to novels about why we should get coffee." My fingers tightened imperceptibly on the stem of my martini glass. This wasn't just a lie. It was a complete rewriting of history. I had never texted him first. He had pursued me for 6 months. "She was obsessed, honestly," Spencer continued, warming to his audience. Eleanor's expression had shifted from assessment to something that looked almost like pity. I felt bad saying no. "You know how it is with desperate women. Sometimes charity is the kindest option." "Spencer," I said quietly, but he was already too deep in his performance. "The best part," he said, his hand now on my shoulder like he was presenting evidence, "is that now she follows me around like a puppy. Goes wherever I go, does whatever I say. Guess I'm her best achievement, right, sweetheart?" The words hung in the air between us, crystalline and sharp. Garrett laughed, the sound bouncing off the wine glasses. Eleanor's smile had become fixed, uncomfortable. Other diners at nearby tables had quieted slightly, the way people do when they sense something significant happening without understanding what. My martini glass remained perfectly steady in my hand. My smile never wavered. But inside, something fundamental shifted, like tectonic plates finally giving way after years of pressure. I saw our entire marriage reframe itself in that moment. Every diminishment, every public correction, every time he had rewritten our history to make himself the hero and me the grateful recipient of his attention. "That's quite a story," Eleanor said, her voice carrying an edge that suggested she wasn't entirely buying it. "Isn't it?" I said, my voice perfectly calibrated to Spencer's preferred pitch. Spencer has such a gift for storytelling. He squeezed my shoulder, pleased with what he took as agreement. "Well, you know what they say, every successful man needs a devoted woman behind him. Or beneath him," Garrett added with a laugh that made my skin crawl. The waiter arrived with our appetizers, providing a merciful interruption. I arranged my napkin in my lap with mechanical precision while my mind worked through calculations Spencer couldn't imagine I was capable of making. The trust fund he didn't know about. The business contacts he thought I had abandoned. The parts of myself I had hidden so well that even I had almost forgotten they existed. Through the soup course, Garrett explained market volatility to me using small words and baseball metaphors, while Eleanor asked about my hobbies in the tone one might use with a child. Spencer's hand remained possessively on my arm, occasionally squeezing when he wanted me to laugh or smile at appropriate moments. Each touch felt like another bar being added to a cage I had helped him build. "You're so lucky," Eleanor said as our entrees arrived. "Spencer taking care of everything, making all the decisions. It must be so relaxing not to have to think too much." "Exactly," Spencer agreed before I could respond. She's much happier now that she doesn't have to worry about complicated things. Aren't you, sweetheart? I looked at him, then really looked at him. The satisfied smile, the casual confidence of a man who believed his own revision of history. He genuinely thought he had done me a favor. He genuinely believed I was nothing before him, would be nothing without him. The happiest, I said, raising my glass in a small toast. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of calculated responses and perfectly timed laughter. I catalogued every slight, every dismissive gesture. Every moment Spencer's narrative of our life together grew more elaborate and more degrading. By dessert I had made my decision. Not in anger, not in hurt, but in perfect clarity. Spencer would never humiliate me again. Not because I would stop him, but because I would stop being the woman he thought he had created. The real Madeline Thorne was still there, waiting beneath the surface of Mrs. Spencer Whitfield. The house settled into its nighttime quiet as Spencer's snoring drifted from our bedroom. I waited another 20 minutes, counting his breathing patterns to ensure he had reached the deep sleep that always followed his whiskey-heavy dinners. The digital clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. when I finally moved, my bare feet silent on the cold kitchen tiles. I passed through the living room, avoiding the floorboard that creaked near the bookshelf, and entered the guest bedroom we had converted into Spencer's home office. He called it his domain, but tonight I had my own agenda. The mahogany desk sat imposing in the moonlight streaming through the blinds, its drawers locked as always. Spencer didn't know I had made copies of his keys months ago during one of his golf weekends. The bottom drawer opened with a soft click. Inside, beneath folders of tax returns and investment statements, my fingers found the slim envelope I had hidden there 3 years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the documents Spencer had never seen, would never think to look for in his own space. The trust fund statement showed a balance that would make his eyes widen. My grandmother's final gift, carefully invested and growing steadily. $8.7 million that he believed didn't exist because I had let him assume my family was ordinary middle-class struggling. Beneath the statement lay my Wharton MBA diploma, the gold seal still bright despite the years. 3 offer letters from Fortune 500 companies, each proposing salaries that dwarfed what Spencer made even now. I had turned them all down. For him. For us. For a love that had required me to be less so he could feel like more. I carefully returned everything to its hiding place and moved to Spencer's computer. He thought his password was clever. Our anniversary date backward. He never imagined I paid enough attention to figure it out. The screen flickered to life, and I navigated to the folders he thought were hidden behind work presentations and client files. What I found made my breath catch. Spreadsheets labeled personal security showed systematic transfers from our joint accounts to an account only in his name. 50,000 here, 30,000 there, small enough amounts to avoid triggering alerts but substantial when tallied. Over the past 2 years he had moved nearly $400,000. My money. My contribution from the small inheritance from my father that I had added to our joint savings, trusting him to manage it. The emails were worse. Conversations with his lawyer friend, Daniel, discussing asset protection strategies and preemptive financial planning. One message, dated 6 months ago, read, "Need to ensure M remains financially dependent. Can't have her getting ideas about independence. The moment they think they don't need us, they leave." My phone vibrated on the desk, startling me. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in years. Veronica Chin. My former business partner. My hand hesitated before answering. "Maddie." Her voice was slightly slurred, the background noise of a bar evident. "I know it's late. I'm sorry. I had to tell you something." "Veronica, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's wrong. God, I'm drunk." She laughed, but it sounded sad. "I kept your name on the contracts, Maddie. 3 of them. The big ones. Morrison Industries, the Hartley Group, and that pharmaceutical company. You still own 40% of the firm." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about?" "I never filed the transfer paperwork. I kept telling myself it was an oversight, but honestly, I knew he was destroying you, and I knew you'd need an escape route eventually." She paused, and I heard ice clinking in a glass. "The firm is worth $12 million now, Maddie. Your 40% is just sitting here waiting for you to come back." My legs felt weak. I sat down hard in Spencer's leather chair. "Veronica, don't say anything now. Just know it's here. You're still listed as co-founder, senior partner on leave. The door is open whenever you're ready to walk through it. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the darkness, my mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Spencer had been stealing from me while I had been sitting on a fortune he knew nothing about. The irony was almost funny, except nothing about this felt like laughter. At 2 a.m., I found myself driving through empty streets toward the industrial district. The storage unit facility was deserted except for security lights casting long shadows between the rows. Unit 47B. I hadn't been here in over a year, but the key was still on my keychain, hidden among the others. The metal door rolled up with a grinding sound that seemed too loud in the silence. Inside, illuminated by a single bare bulb, sat the archaeological remains of my former life. Cardboard boxes labeled in my neat handwriting: awards, client files, office photos. The garment bags hanging on a portable rack contained my old business suits. Armani, Chanel, the armor of a woman who had once commanded boardrooms. I opened the first box and pulled out a crystal plaque. Entrepreneur of the Year Madeline Thorne. Another. Excellence in Strategic Consulting. My fingers traced the engraved letters of a name that no longer felt like mine. Beneath the awards I found photo albums from company events, pictures of me shaking hands with CEOs, speaking at conferences, laughing with clients who valued my opinion. The laptop was in the third box, wrapped in bubble wrap like a relic. I powered it on, surprised the battery still held a charge. The screen came to life, showing a desktop frozen in time. Email contacts for hundreds of clients. Proposals I had written. Strategic plans that had saved companies millions. All waiting, patient as archaeology. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, was a birthday card. The handwriting was my mother's, shaky but determined. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since Spencer had convinced me she was toxic, jealous of our happiness. The card was from my last birthday before the silence. Inside she had written, "My darling girl, I hope someday you remember who you were before him. You were magnificent. You still are. Love, Mom." I sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of a life I had abandoned, and felt something crack open inside me. Not break. Crack open like a seed that had been dormant finally sensing spring. These weren't just objects, they were proof. Proof that I had existed as a complete person before Spencer. Proof that I had been accomplished, respected, valued for my mind and not just my compliance. I loaded several boxes into my car, including the laptop and a garment bag containing my favorite suit, a black Saint Laurent that had made me feel invincible. As I drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, I thought about the evening's discoveries. Spencer's financial betrayal. Veronica's preserved partnership. My mother's patient hope. Each revelation was a thread, and together they were weaving themselves into something that looked like a rope. Or maybe a ladder. Back home, I hid everything in the guest room closet behind winter coats we never wore. Spencer was still snoring, oblivious to my absence, to my discoveries, to the woman quietly reassembling herself in the margins of his carefully controlled life. I slipped back into bed beside him, my body cold from the night air but my mind burning with possibilities. He stirred slightly, his arm reaching for me out of habit, pulling me against him in a possessive embrace even in sleep. I lay there, feeling the weight of his arm like a shackle, and began to plan. Morning arrived with Spencer's alarm at 6:30, his hand reaching across the bed to confirm I was still there before he rose for his shower. I lay still for another moment, listening to the familiar sounds of his routine, then slipped from bed to prepare his breakfast. My movements were automatic. 2 eggs over easy whole wheat toast, fresh orange juice. But my mind was elsewhere, calculating the hours until my 10 o'clock meeting. I had told Spencer I was getting my hair done. He had nodded absently, already scrolling through market reports on his phone, and handed me his credit card. "Don't go crazy," he had said, his standard warning whenever I spent money, even on things he required me to maintain. The coffee shop where I met Sandra Harrison was deliberately chosen, 20 miles from Spencer's office, in a neighborhood he would never visit. Sandra looked exactly the same as she had 3 years ago when I had saved her company $2 million with a restructuring plan. Her eyes widened when she saw me, then softened with something between pity and relief. "Madeline Thorne," she said, using my maiden name deliberately. "I wondered if I would ever see you again." We sat in a corner booth, far from the windows. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, feeling its warmth anchor me to this moment, this choice. I'm considering returning to consulting, I said carefully, watching her reaction. Sandra leaned back, studying me. Considering? Or deciding? Testing the waters. She stirred her coffee slowly, seeming to weigh her words. Your husband approached me last year. Did you know that? He tried to pitch his firm's services, said he could offer better rates than our current advisors. My expression remained neutral, but inside, something tightened. I wasn't aware. He was. Sandra paused, choosing her words carefully. Unprepared. Arrogant. He actually told me that women-owned businesses like mine needed masculine strategic thinking to truly succeed. I had him escorted out after 20 minutes. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Spencer had never mentioned approaching Sandra, never mentioned the rejection. But it explained his increased irritability last spring, his sharp comments about female executives being diversity hires. He didn't know about our history, Sandra continued. Didn't realize you had restructured my entire operation. When I mentioned your name, he actually laughed and said you were playing at business before you met him. I set down my cup carefully, controlling the tremor in my hands. I see. Sandra reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching mine. Your strategic mind saved my company, Madeline. If you're really coming back, I have 3 projects waiting. Real money, real challenges. Interested? Yes, I said, the word escaping before I could second-guess it. After leaving Sandra, I drove to a small business district in Riverside, where I had leased a modest office suite under M. Thorne Consulting. The space was simple. 1 room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking a quiet street. Nothing like the glass-walled corner office I had once occupied, but it was mine. I spent an hour setting up the essentials. New laptop purchased with my hidden funds. Business cards with my name in raised lettering. A single orchid on the desk, purple and defiant. I opened bank accounts at 3 different institutions, carefully moving money from my trust fund, establishing financial independence piece by piece. By noon, I was back home, preparing Spencer's preferred lunch for when he occasionally worked from home. Turkey sandwich, no mayo, lettuce on the side because he didn't like it soggy. I was plating it when my phone rang. Eleanor Blackwell. Madeline, darling, are you free for lunch tomorrow? There's a new place in Westmont I'm dying to try. Eleanor had never invited me anywhere without Spencer. My instinct was to decline, but something in her tone made me pause. Of course. What time? The next day, Eleanor was already seated when I arrived, a glass of wine half empty despite it being barely noon. She looked different without Garrett beside her. Smaller, more human, less like a perfectly positioned accessory. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble as I sat down. About Spencer. My spine straightened, but I kept my voice level. Oh. 2 years ago at the firm's Christmas party, I saw him with his secretary in the coat room. They weren't discussing quarterly reports. She took another sip of wine. I assumed you knew. The way you always smile through everything, I thought you had one of those arrangements. You know, where wives look the other way for the lifestyle. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Kelly. 23-year-old Kelly with the accounting degree and the nervous laugh. I had trained her on Spencer's coffee preferences, his filing system, his meeting schedule. She had sent me a thank you card. I didn't know, I said quietly. Eleanor's face crumbled slightly. Oh honey, I'm sorry. I thought. Garrett says all the wives know and just pretend not to. It's apparently standard procedure at the firm. Standard procedure. My husband's infidelity was standard procedure. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Eleanor signaled for another wine. Because last week at your dinner when he told that awful story about you chasing him, I saw your face. Really saw it. And I recognized something I see in my own mirror every morning. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women trapped in similar cages, recognition passing between us like a secret handshake. 3 days later, I sat in Patricia Kemp's office, a modest space in a strip mall 40 minutes from home. Patricia was not what I expected. No power suit, no intimidating desk. She wore a simple cardigan and had kind eyes that had seen too many women in my position. Tell me about your situation, she said simply. I laid out everything. The hidden trust fund. The business partnership Veronica had preserved. The systematic financial transfers Spencer had made. His affair. The emotional degradation. Patricia took notes in neat handwriting, occasionally nodding. "I need to tell you something," she said when I finished. "This isn't Spencer's first marriage." My breath caught. He was engaged before. 8 years ago. It ended with a sealed settlement, which usually means money changed hands to keep details private. I did some checking. The woman's name was Rachel Morrison. She now lives in Seattle and runs a successful marketing firm. Patricia pulled out a folder. I reached out to her discreetly. She couldn't say much due to the settlement terms, but she did say one thing. Tell her to document everything and leave before he breaks her completely. The words hung in the air between us. I was not the first woman Spencer had tried to diminish into nothing. I was just the current one. Patricia leaned forward. "Madeline, between your trust fund, your business partnership, and what we can prove about his financial deceptions, you have significant power here. More than you realize. The question is, what do you want?" What did I want? For the first time in years, I had the luxury of asking myself that question. "I want to be free," I said. "And I want him to know that I was never what he thought I was." Patricia smiled then, the expression sharp and understanding. "Then let's make that happen." I left her office with a plan forming, pieces clicking into place like a puzzle I had been solving without realizing it. At home that evening I made Spencer's favorite dinner, coq au vin with roasted vegetables, and listened to him complain about a client who had dared to question his judgment. "Some people just don't know their place," he said, cutting into his chicken with unnecessary force. "No," I agreed, refilling his wine glass. "They certainly don't." Spencer set his fork down with deliberate force, the sound sharp against the china plate. He stared at the salmon I had prepared, his expression shifting from annoyance to disgust. "This is overcooked," he announced, pushing the plate away. "How many times have I told you? Salmon should be pink in the center. This is basic cooking, Madeline. A child could manage it." I looked at the perfectly cooked fish, its interior the exact shade of coral that my culinary instructor at Le Cordon Bleu would have praised. But mentioning my training would only escalate his mood, which had been deteriorating for weeks since his latest deal fell through. "I'll make you something else," I offered, already standing. "Don't bother. I'll grab something at the club." He stood, straightening his tie with sharp movements. Maybe they can manage a simple meal without destroying it. After he left, I sat alone at our dining table, staring at the abandoned plates. The salmon was perfect. We both knew it. But perfection had become another weapon in his arsenal, something to deny me even when evidence sat directly in front of him. The next morning, Spencer found me reading in the living room, a new biography of Katharine Graham I had picked up from the library. "Pretentious choice," he commented, barely glancing at the cover. "You realize she ran the Washington Post? That requires actual business acumen and education. Bit ambitious for someone who never even finished college, don't you think?" I closed the book carefully, my 3 degrees burning like hidden coals in my chest. "Just interested in successful women," I said mildly. "Successful women," he repeated with a laugh that held no warmth. "Right. Well, when you actually accomplish something worth reading about, let me know." He left for work earlier these days, returning later. His clothes sometimes carried unfamiliar perfume, not Kelly's nervous, floral scent, but something more expensive, more deliberate. I had stopped asking about his evenings. His lies had become lazy, careless, like he no longer believed I was worth the effort of decent deception. That Thursday afternoon, I was arranging flowers in the foyer when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar figure I hadn't expected. My mother, Ellen, standing with a small suitcase and an expression of determined worry. I opened the door slowly as if she might evaporate. "Mom." "I drove straight through," she said simply. 6 hours. I had a feeling. We stood there for a moment, 2 women separated by 2 years of Spencer-orchestrated silence. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into an embrace that smelled of lavender and homemade bread. The scent of the life I had before Spencer convinced me it was provincial and embarrassing. I made tea while she settled at the kitchen counter, her keen eyes taking in every detail. The pristine surfaces, the absence of personal photos, the way I moved through the space like a guest careful not to disturb anything. "You look thin," she said finally. "And tired. But mostly you look empty." The tears came suddenly, silently, running down my face while I stood frozen with the kettle in my hand. Mom stood and gently took it from me, setting it aside. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly. "What has he done to you?" We sat in the living room for an hour, my mother listening as words poured out. Not everything, not the worst parts, but enough. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just held my hand while I talked. Finally she spoke. "I kept your room exactly as you left it. Your old desk, your books, everything. When you're ready to leave him, my door is open. No questions, no timeline, just open." "Mom, You don't have to decide anything now," she said firmly. "Just know you have somewhere to go. Someone who remembers who you really are." She left before Spencer returned, but her presence lingered like a promise. 2 days later, I was at the gym working through my frustration on the elliptical machine, when Kelly appeared beside me. Spencer's secretary looked nervous, glancing around as if he might materialize from behind the weight machines. "Mrs. Whitfield," she began, then stopped. "Madeline, I need to tell you something." I slowed my pace, studying her. She was wringing her hands, her usual nervous gesture amplified. "It's about Mr. Whitfield, Spencer. I've been wanting to say something for months, but I was scared of losing my job." "What about him?" I kept my voice neutral, though my pulse quickened. "He's been sabotaging you," she blurted out. "I've heard him on calls telling people you're unstable, that you have mental health issues, that you're unreliable. He turned down 3 job inquiries for you last month alone. People calling about consulting positions. He told them you weren't interested, that you couldn't handle the pressure." The gym sounds faded to white noise. "He's been taking my calls?" Kelly nodded miserably. "He had IT redirect your professional emails to his account. I saw him delete an invitation for you to speak at a Women in Business conference. He laughed about it, told someone on the phone, 'She's nothing without me, and I make sure it stays that way.'" My hands gripped the elliptical handles until my knuckles went white. "How long?" "At least a year. Maybe longer. I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't know how, and he's so controlling and—" "Thank you for telling me," I managed, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Kelly shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. He's been telling people at the firm that you're having a breakdown. Setting up a narrative for if you ever try to leave. Making sure no one would believe you or hire you." After Kelly left, I sat in my car in the parking garage, engine off, trying to process the scope of what I had just learned. This went beyond control, beyond diminishment. This was systematic destruction. He had been actively dismantling my future while I cooked his dinners and arranged his life. That evening, I accessed our home computer while Spencer was showering. Using skills from a coding course I had taken years ago, I found the email forwarding rules he had set up. There they were, dozens of redirected messages. Job offers, speaking engagements, former clients trying to reconnect, all routed to Spencer's account and deleted. One email, from a Fortune 500 CEO I had once advised, was particularly painful. "Madeline, I've been trying to reach you for months. We have a senior strategy position that would be perfect for you. Please call me." Dated 6 months ago. Deleted the same day. I documented everything, taking screenshots, forwarding copies to my new private account. The betrayal sat like ice in my chest. Not hot anger, but cold, crystalline clarity. He hadn't just belittled me, he had actively worked to destroy any possibility of my independence, creating a prison while telling me I was free to leave anytime. The shower shut off upstairs. I quickly closed everything, returning the screen to his market analysis spreadsheet. When Spencer came down, I was in the kitchen, preparing his evening coffee exactly as he liked it. "You look tense," he observed, accepting the cup without thanks. "Just tired," I replied, watching him sip the coffee I had made perfectly, knowing he would find fault with it anyway. "Maybe you should take something for that," he suggested. "You've seemed unstable lately. Emotional. I've been worried about your mental state." There it was, the narrative Kelly had warned me about, being tested in our own kitchen. I smiled the empty smile I had perfected. "You're probably right," I agreed. "I should take better care of myself." Spencer settled into his leather chair with his evening scotch, scrolling through his phone while I cleared the dinner plates. His self-satisfaction filled the room like cologne, thick and suffocating. I moved quietly to the kitchen, then slipped into the small pantry where I had hidden my new phone, one he didn't know existed, purchased with cash from my hidden accounts. For the past week, I had been building something Spencer would never suspect I was capable of creating. A comprehensive evidence portfolio. The phone contained everything. Screenshots of his financial transfers, showing the systematic theft from our joint accounts. Audio recordings of his daily humiliations, captured by the voice recorder app one activated each morning before he woke. Our state was single-party consent for recordings, a detail I had confirmed with Patricia. Every cruel comment, every lie about my education, every moment he diminished me was now preserved in digital amber. I had also gathered written testimonies. Sandra Harrison had provided a formal statement about Spencer's failed pitch and his dismissive comments about my business acumen. Kelly had secretly forwarded me copies of the emails Spencer had intercepted and deleted. Even Eleanor had agreed to confirm what she knew about his affairs, though she warned me she could only go so far without risking Garrett's career. The photo gallery held images of my real documents. My degrees, my trust fund statements, the partnership papers from Veronica's firm. Each piece of evidence was backed up to 3 different cloud services under accounts Spencer would never think to look for. I had learned from his own deception. Always have contingencies. The next morning was Thursday, country club day. I dressed carefully in the coral sundress Spencer approved of, the one that made me look appropriately feminine without trying too hard, as he put it. The club dining room buzzed with its usual mixture of business gossip and personal scandals, the currency of the wealthy and bored. I positioned myself at a table with Margaret Whitman and Jennifer Cross, 2 women whose talent for spreading information exceeded their tennis skills by considerable margins. They were already 2 mimosas deep when I arrived, their voices carrying that particular pitch that preceded valuable gossip. "How's Spencer?" Margaret asked, her eyes sharp despite the casual tone. "Garrett mentioned he's been under pressure lately." I sighed, letting concern color my features. "He's been forgetting things. Little things mostly, but it worries me. Yesterday he insisted we met when he was at Harvard, but Spencer went to State. And last week he told clients I never finished college when I have my MBA from Wharton. I think the stress is affecting his memory." Jennifer leaned in, her interest piqued. "Memory issues? At his age?" "The doctor says stress can do that," I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "He's been confused about our finances too, moving money around without remembering why. I found transfers he couldn't explain. I'm trying to be supportive, but it's frightening." Margaret touched my hand sympathetically. "You poor thing. It must be so difficult watching him struggle." Within hours, I knew the story would spread through their networks, each retelling adding its own embellishments. Spencer's reputation for sharp precision would develop hairline cracks, doubt seeping in like water through limestone. That afternoon my phone buzzed with a call from Veronica. I answered in my car, parked at a overlook 20 minutes from home. "It's official," she said without preamble. "Full reinstatement as senior partner, 40% stake as originally structured, and a corner office waiting. But here's the interesting part. I've been doing research. Remember Morrison Industries? Hartford Group? Pembroke Financial? Spencer's failed pitches from last year. Exactly. I've had informal conversations with all 3. They're interested in working with someone who understands where Spencer's strategies went wrong. Someone who could offer a corrective approach." My heart rate quickened. "You want to target his failures." "I want to offer better solutions to companies that have already seen his limitations. It's not personal, it's business. The fact that it also happens to be poetic justice is just a bonus." She outlined the proposal. I would lead a new division specifically designed to capture clients dissatisfied with traditional firms like Spencer's. My insider knowledge of his methods, combined with my own strategic expertise, would give us a significant advantage. "When?" I asked. "Whenever you're ready. But Madeline, Morrison Industries wants to meet next week. Their CEO James Morrison specifically asked for you. Apparently, Sandra Harrison sang your praises at a conference last month." After the call, I drove to Nordstrom at the upscale mall 40 minutes away where Spencer never shopped. In the designer section I found it, a black Oscar de la Renta gown that cost $12,000. The sales associate's eyes widened when I produced my private credit card, the one linked to my trust fund. "Special occasion?" she asked while processing the payment. "You could say that." At home, I hung the dress in the back of my closet behind old coats Spencer never noticed. Then I stood before our bedroom mirror, practicing. Not preening or checking my appearance, but rehearsing the words I would say at his company gala next week. Thank you all for this warm reception. I'm delighted to announce the reopening of Thorn Consulting, in partnership with Chin Strategies. We've already secured 3 major clients, including Morrison Industries. I refined each phrase, calibrated my tone, professional, confident, the voice of a woman who had never been diminished. The voice Spencer had spent 7 years trying to erase. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Kemp. Papers ready for service. Process server on standby for your signal. Everything was converging toward a single point like light through a lens. The gala was in 5 days. Spencer would receive his Partnership Achievement Award, the recognition he had craved for years. He would stand at that podium, basking in applause, probably telling another demeaning story about his devoted wife. But this time would be different. This time, when he called me his achievement, I would show everyone exactly whose achievement was about to be dismantled. I prepared dinner that evening with unusual care, each dish perfect, each detail precisely as Spencer preferred. He arrived home late, barely acknowledging the effort, lost in preparation for his moment of triumph. The gala's Tuesday, he reminded me unnecessarily. Wear something appropriate. Not too flashy. You know how you get carried away sometimes. Of course, I replied, thinking of the $12,000 gown hidden in our closet. I know exactly what to wear. He nodded, satisfied with my compliance, and returned to his phone. I watched him for a moment. This man who had systematically tried to erase me, who had built his confidence on the foundation of my diminishment. He had no idea that the ground beneath him had already shifted, that the walls of his carefully constructed narrative were about to collapse. Tuesday couldn't come soon enough. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind that made flowers bloom too early and left everyone slightly off balance. I spent the morning at my office, my real office, reviewing the Morrison Industries contract one final time while Spencer believed I was at the spa preparing for his big evening. The irony wasn't lost on me that he had given me extra money for hair and makeup, unknowingly funding the very transformation that would end his carefully constructed narrative. The Fairmont Hotel's ballroom glittered with the kind of understated elegance that whispered money rather than shouting it. I arrived separately from Spencer, claiming a nail appointment had run long. In truth, I had needed those extra minutes to steady my breathing, to practice my smile one more time in the car mirror, to remind myself that after tonight, I would never have to practice this particular smile again. The cocktail hour was already in full swing when I entered, the black Oscar de la Renta gown moving like liquid shadow around me. Several heads turned, not the polite, dismissive glances I usually received as Spencer's accessory, but genuine double takes. The dress was a statement, and everyone in that room spoke the language of expensive statements. Spencer stood near the bar, surrounded by his usual circle, his hand gesturing broadly as he told some story that had Garrett laughing. He hadn't noticed me yet. Perfect. I began with Margaret Whitman, who stood with a group of partners' wives near the silent auction tables. "Madeline, my God, that dress," she breathed, her eyes scanning the designer gown with obvious envy. "Thank you," I said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Spencer doesn't know I bought it. He's been so confused lately about our finances, I didn't want to worry him further." "Is he still having those memory issues?" Jennifer Cross had materialized at my elbow, drawn by the scent of developing drama. I sighed, letting concern shade my features. "It's getting worse. Last night he told David from accounting that I was his secretary before we married." His secretary. Can you imagine? I was actually consulting for Fortune 500 companies when we met, but he seems to have completely rewritten history. The women exchanged glances, the kind that preceded extensive phone calls and lunch discussions. I moved through the room strategically, stopping at James Harrison's group next. Spencer's senior partner stood with several board members, their wives hovering at the periphery of their business discussion. "James," I said warmly, extending my hand. He took it, his expression puzzled but polite. "Madeline, you look different tonight." "Thank you. I wanted to look my best for Spencer's big moment." I paused, then added with calculated casualness, "Though I do worry about him. He's been under such pressure." "Did he tell you he's been calling my MBA program a hobby course?" Wharton might be disappointed to hear their graduate degree described that way. James's eyebrows rose. You went to Wharton? Class of 2014. Graduated summa cum laude. I smiled softly. But Spencer prefers to forget that. He's been telling people I never finished college. The stress really has affected his memory. I left James processing this information and found Eleanor Blackwell near the windows. She watched me approach with something like anticipation in her eyes. You're really doing it, she said quietly. Doing what? I asked, though we both knew. Whatever it is you're about to do. You're glowing with it. She touched my arm briefly. Good for you. The dinner bell chimed and we moved toward our assigned tables. Spencer finally noticed me as I approached, his eyes widening at the dress before his expression shifted to irritation. What are you wearing? He hissed under his breath. That's not the dress we discussed. I thought you'd like it, I replied calmly, taking my seat. It's special occasion after all. The dinner proceeded with its usual rhythm of speeches and polite applause. Spencer kept shooting me glances, clearly unsettled by my appearance, by the way other men were looking at me, by something in the atmosphere he couldn't quite identify. Finally, the moment arrived. The CEO stood to announce the Partnership Achievement Award. Spencer straightened his tie, his face assuming the expression of humble surprise he had practiced in our bathroom mirror. This year's recipient has shown exceptional dedication to our firm's values, the CEO read from his cards. Spencer Whitfield has consistently demonstrated what it means to be a leader in our organization. Spencer rose to thunderous applause, making his way to the stage with measured steps. He accepted the Crystal Award, holding it up to catch the light before approaching the microphone. Thank you all so much for this incredible honor, he began, his voice carrying that particular tone of false modesty he had perfected. I couldn't have done any of this without support, particularly from my wife, Madeline. He found me in the crowd, gesturing for me to stand. She's been my biggest supporter, following me every step of the way. I often joke that I'm her greatest achievement. I stood slowly, the room's attention shifting to me like a spotlight. Actually, Spencer, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, I have an announcement of my own. The silence deepened, became electric. Spencer's smile froze on his face. I'm delighted to announce that Thorne Consulting is reopening. I let that land before continuing. In fact, I've been running it successfully for the past month. We've already secured 3 major clients, including Morrison Industries, the Hartley Group and Pembroke Financial. Gasps rippled through the room. Those were all companies that had rejected Spencer's proposals. Spencer's face had gone pale. Madeline, what are you? Oh, and that charming story you love to tell about how we met? I continued, my voice steady as steel. Let me share the actual version. You pursued me for 6 months after I gave a presentation your CEO called revolutionary. You sent flowers to my office every day. You begged me for coffee 43 times. I have the emails. You called me the most intelligent woman you'd ever met. It's a shame you forgot that woman existed the moment you thought you owned her. The ballroom had become a held breath. Spencer stood frozen at the podium, his award hanging limply in his hand. I won't take up any more of your celebration, I said, gathering my clutch. Congratulations on your achievement, Spencer. I'm sure it will keep you company. I walked toward the exit with measured steps, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the absolute silence. As I passed their table, Kelly mouthed thank you, tears in her eyes. James Harrison nodded with what looked like respect, possibly admiration. Eleanor Blackwell began clapping, alone at first, then joined by one person, then another, until scattered applause followed me to the doors. Behind me, Spencer's voice cracked through the microphone. Madeline, wait. But I didn't wait. I had waited 7 years. That was enough. The doors closed behind me, cutting off the explosion of voices that erupted in my wake. The valet already had my car waiting. I had called ahead, knowing exactly when I would need to leave. As I drove away from the Fairmont, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 7 years, the woman looking back was someone I recognized. The city stretched before me through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, dawn painting the skyline in shades of gold and possibility. My phone sat face up on the desk, Spencer's name appearing and disappearing as call after call went unanswered. 17 voicemails had accumulated through the night. I pressed play on the first one while sipping coffee from a simple white mug. Mine chosen by me without consideration for anyone else's preferences. Madeline, what the hell was that? Call me immediately. His voice tight with rage. The second, this is ridiculous. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. We need to talk. By the 5th, please just answer. We can work this out. The 10th, I'm sorry, okay? Is that what you want to hear? The 15th, you can't just throw away 7 years like this. The last one recorded at 4:47 a.m. Please. I need you. I deleted them all with one sweep of my finger, then blocked his number. The silence that followed felt like the first breath after swimming up from deep water. Patricia Kemp called at 9 sharp. The process server delivered the papers an hour ago. Spencer signed for them at his office. How did he react? According to my contact, he tried to refuse them at first. Then he apparently threw them across his desk and demanded to speak to you. Patricia paused. His lawyer called me 20 minutes later. Daniel Reeves. Daniel. His friend who had helped him hide assets, who had crafted those emails about keeping me dependent. The irony was delicious. What did Daniel say? That Spencer wants to contest everything. But here's the beautiful thing, I sent him our evidence file. The financial transfers, the email intercepts, the recordings. Everything. Patricia's voice carried deep satisfaction. Daniel called back 10 minutes later suggesting mediation. Within a week, Spencer's position had crumbled entirely. The firm had launched an internal investigation after several partners' wives reported his comments about my mental stability, combined with the scene at the gala. James Harrison personally called to apologize for not seeing the situation sooner, carefully avoiding any admission of legal liability while making it clear Spencer's partnership track had been permanently derailed. The mediation took place in a neutral conference room, beige walls and fluorescent lights that made Spencer look gray and diminished. He sat across from me, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear while Patricia calmly presented our terms. My client is prepared to walk away with only what she brought into the marriage, Patricia stated, plus her documented share of joint assets prior to Mr. Whitfield's unauthorized transfers. In exchange, we require no contest to the divorce, no claims on Thorne Consulting, and no contact following the decree. Spencer's jaw clenched. She built that company during our marriage. I have rights. Actually, I interrupted, my first words to him since the gala. I built it before we met, maintained it during our marriage, and rebuilt it despite your sabotage. You have no rights to anything I created. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. Daniel whispered urgently to Spencer, showing him something on his laptop. Probably the recording where Spencer explicitly stated I was nothing without him, and outlined his plan to keep me financially dependent. Spencer's shoulders sagged. We accept the terms, Daniel said quietly. 3 months later, I stood in our expanded office space, watching Veronica direct the installation of a conference table that could seat 20. We had outgrown our original suite in 6 weeks, our client list expanding faster than either of us had anticipated. Morrison Industries wants to increase their retainer, Veronica announced, popping a bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than Spencer ever allowed me to order at restaurants. And guess who called this morning? Garrett Blackwell. He wants to jump ship from Spencer's firm and bring his portfolio with him. I accepted a glass of champagne, the bubbles rising like tiny celebrations. What about Spencer? James mentioned he's been encouraged to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Apparently his last 3 presentations were disasters. Clients said he seemed distracted, unprepared. She raised her glass. To karma. To freedom, I corrected, and we drank. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it unopened, but something made me look. It was from Spencer. He had gotten a new phone trying to circumvent my block. I see now what I lost. 5 words that might have meant something once. But reading them, I realized the fundamental error in his thinking. He believed he had lost me as if I had been a possession that slipped through his fingers. The truth was simpler and more devastating. He had never truly known me at all. He had married a woman he immediately set about diminishing, then mourned the loss of someone who had never existed in his imagination. I deleted the message without responding and turned back to the wall where my degrees now hung proudly beside my achievement awards, no longer hidden in storage. The nameplate on my door read, Madeline Thorne Sue, in bold letters that caught the morning sun. My mother visited the office that afternoon, bringing homemade cookies for the staff and tears of pride she didn't try to hide. "There you are," she said simply, touching my face. "There's my daughter." Kelly, who now worked as my executive assistant, knocked and entered. "Your 3 o'clock is here. James Harrison." James entered with a respectful nod, no trace of the condescension he had shown when I was Spencer's wife. "Madeline, thank you for seeing me. I have a proposition that might interest you." As we discussed his company's needs and how Thorne Consulting could serve them, I caught my reflection in the window. A woman in a suit that fit perfectly, chosen by her own hand, sitting in her own office, building her own empire. The best revenge hadn't been the public humiliation or the swift divorce or even the professional triumph. It had been simpler and more complete than any of that. The best revenge was becoming myself again. Not the self Spencer had tried to erase, but an even stronger version who had survived his diminishment and emerged not just intact but transformed. Spencer had called me his achievement once, as if I were something he had crafted. But achievements aren't crafted by others. They're earned through our own strength, resilience, and refusal to accept less than we deserve. And this achievement, this life I was building, belonged to no one but me. If this story of calculated revenge resonated with you, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Madeline stood up at the gala and revealed she'd already secured Spencer's rejected clients. What was your most satisfying moment? Share it in the comments below. Want more stories of people reclaiming their power and turning the tables on those who wronged them? Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.